Hello everybody, this is Namanjane and welcome back to this series of tutorials where you're gonna learn how to make a role-playing game. So last time we've left off the tutorial by learning how to make a click to move functionality where your character will actually move around the terrain as you click on the terrain. So today we're going to learn on how to make some enemies and add some more action towards the game since it's really boring right now. So let's go ahead and add some enemies. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to create a game object and you're going to create a cube. And we're going to just shape this cube so that it looks more like a human, even though it's not going to look like a human. And we're gonna name this enemy. And we're gonna add a nose to it, but this time the nose is gonna be a capsule. So what we're gonna do is we're just gonna take the capsule and rotate it 90 degrees on the x-axis, and we're gonna just fit it in like that, so it looks like a nose. And we're just gonna make it a little bit smaller. And the reason we're adding a capsule is so that we can actually differentiate between the enemy and ourselves. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna call this capsule a nose. And we're gonna drag the nose into the enemy so that the nose tells the enemy as we did last time. And we're just gonna rotate this by 180 degrees on the y-axis so that it's looking towards us. And that's how it looks like. So now what we're going to do is we're going to add an enemy script to this enemy over here. And this enemy script is going to give the functionality of an enemy. And we're going to create it in C# and we're going to add. So now we have an enemy script. Now if you see in our assets folder, it's getting quite messy over here. So what we're going to do is we're just going to organize it a little bit more, and we're going to create a new folder. And we're going to call it scripts, in which we're going to put in all our scripts. And we're going to drag the scripts. And we're going to create a new folder called scene. And we're going to drag our home scene folder into our scene. Both the scene itself and its folder. And if you realize, the home scene folder has a nav mesh over here, which is the one we baked right here. Okay, so now that we have added an enemy script over here, we also want to add a player script to our players since we need the combat. So we need both entities to fight each other. So we actually need a player script. So we're going to add a player script. Now notice that we have two scripts over here, and these two scripts are independent of each other. So for now, currently they don't affect each other. Of course we can create code that in a way that they affect each other, but we're going to come to that later. So let's start scripting our player script and our enemy script. So first of all, we need to realize all the variables that our enemy script and our player script needs. And when I mean by variables, I mean attributes. So for example, enemy is going to have a name, it's going to have a certain amount of health, and it's going to have a certain amount of damage, etc, etc. So we need to define all these attributes of an enemy, or else the computer won't actually know its attributes. So to define these attributes, we can just type in int, or we're going to type in string name. Now string is basically a list of characters, so it can basically be anything, and you put them in quotation marks so you can name them literally anything, as I did. So this one we're going to name just first enemy because he's our very first enemy. And what we're going to do is we're going to make this public. Now bear in mind that for now we're making this public, But later on, as we go in this course, we're going to learn that making variables public is actually bad because of encapsulation and other stuff. But you don't need to worry about that right now. We're just going to make it public for now. And then we're going to add a public int health and public int damage. So these define the attributes of the enemy. And make sure to save your script. And once you go back, you're going to see that your enemy script actually has these attributes and you can change them from here. So we're going to change the health from 0 to 100 and the damage from 0 to 10. And this way our enemy actually has attributes. And similarly, we need attributes for our player. So we're just going to add a public string name so we can just name our player. Public int health and public int damage. So we're going to go back and we're going to name our player. I'm just going to name the player my name, which is Naman, and I'm just going to give it a health of 100, and you're going to give it a damage which is slightly more or much more than our enemy, and we're going to give it 30 for now. So our enemy has a damage of 10 and our player has a damage of 30, so we are much stronger than our enemy. So now what we're going to do is we need to use these attributes because now they're standing there and we're not using them and they have no point in the script. So we need to actually use them. So what we're going to do is we're going to make a new method. And now I'm going to explain what a method is. Let me just write this method. And we're going to call it attack. Now, a method is basically, you can think of it as a place where you're going to execute all the code. So whenever you call this method, so for example in my start over here, if you remember from the last tutorial, whenever the game starts, the code is executed in this method. So I'm going to call my attack method over here. So basically what I'm saying is, okay, now call the attack method and execute all the code that is in here. So we're going to just say, okay, debug.log, I am attacking. So what is going to happen is when the game starts, it's going to call the attack method and it's going to execute all the lines in this attack method. And if I go back and I play, you're going to see that it only debugs.log one time I am attacking because we actually call the method. And usually we use methods to make things more cleaner. For example, if we go back to our click to move script, we have a bunch of code in our update method. Usually a very good a very good code would have a separate method for this whole functionality. So we could create a new method called void move. So this method only deals with moving the character to the specified position. And we can copy paste all of this code into our move method and call move from update. And now the code just is a little bit more cleaner and more organized, and it's good coding practice in general. And another good coding practice is commenting your code. So you can just say this method handles the movement of the player. And you can just add more information like the player moves to the point where the user clicks on the terrain or something like that. But usually it's good practice to comment your methods and just comment in general so other people can understand your code. Okay, so just to let you know that this is still gonna work, this code that we have changed in click to move, I'm just gonna play and I'm just gonna move around. And as you can see, it still works. I'm just gonna go back to the player and increase its nav mesh agent speed since it's really slow. Okay, and I'm gonna save and I'm gonna go back and we're gonna get back to our attacking script. So in our attack method, what we're going to do is whenever our player presses the space button, we're going to actually attack our enemy. Later on, we're going to make a mechanic where whenever we're not going to use the space button, but whenever we click on our enemy, it's actually going to attack. But for now, we're going to make it simple. And we're going to say if only if we press spacebar, only then we're going to attack. So in our attack method, we're going to say if input.get key up. So this means that whenever we press a key and then lift up the key, and keycode.space. So whenever we press the space button on our keyboard, we're going to attack. So we're just going to say debug.log attack for now. But we also need to make sure that we attack only when we're in the melee range. So that means that we also need another variable which describes the range. So we're going to have public float range. Now you'll notice that this is a float while this over here is an integer. Now floats, integer only can handle values like 4 or 5. It cannot store values like 5.2 because integer is an int and it does not have decimal points. And if you try to attempt to put in 5.2 for an integer, it's going to truncate the 0.2, which means that it's going to take it off and only 5 is going to be left. And it doesn't matter how far it is away, even if it is 5.9, it'll ignore the 0.9 and round it off to 5 and not 6. So it just removes it away. And so for handling decimal points, that is what we use float for. So you can say range is equal to 4.3 and it is completely valid. But you need to remember to put an F at the end of the number to emphasize that it's a float. I don't know why the syntax is like that, but you need to put an F at the end of every float you make. So we're going to go back over here and we're going to go to our player and we're going to change our range to let's say 3 for now, or 5. Let's just make it 5. It's probably too big, but we can reduce it afterwards. And in our attack method, what we're going to do is we're going to make another if statement like the nested one we did before. And what we're going to do is we're going to calculate the distance between our enemy and our player and see if it is less than the range. But to actually perform this, we need we need to know where our enemy is. So we need to know our opponent. So for that, what we're going to do is we're going to have another variable. And we're going to call it transform or enemy. Because remember that we named our script enemy over here, and it has to be the enemy script because we are going to get the enemy script. And we're going to call it opponent. There we go. That's too many variables, but it's okay. And then what we're going to do is we're going to say if vector3.distance between our opponent, or we're actually going to change this enemy to a transform for now. Because we want to access the transform of our enemy. So we're going to make it transform. And we're going to say if our opponent.position, if the distance, so vector3.distance, opponent.position, and our transform.position, so we're going to say transform.position is less than range. And we're going to put open bracket and close brackets. Curly bracket, I mean. And if it is less than range, we're going to debug.log attack. And this calculates the distance between our transform and the enemy's transform. And what we're going to do is in our player, you're going to see that our opponent is none over here. And if we play our actually we need to call the method because we never called the method. So in our update we're going to call the method over here, because nothing is going to happen if you don't call it, since it'll never execute the code. And now you'll notice that you'll get the opponent label over here in which you can drag your enemy. But if you don't drag your enemy and you click, if you press the spacebar, you will see an error saying that you'll see an error saying unassigned reference exception, which means that you don't have a reference over here. And hence you need to drag your enemy object into this opponent, and it's going to assign this to the enemy. Now whenever you click, it's not going to do anything yet because we're not in range, but once we get closer, it's going to say attack, as you can see over here. As you can see, but you need to get really close, so we're just going to change the range to 10, and we're going to play again. And as that's still, oh, that is fine, I guess. Or actually, that's way too far. I'm just gonna change the range in a appropriate. Let's. 2.5. I think 3. Yeah, 3 is a good number. So as you can see, only when we get in range, for example now, it's going to print out attack, but if you're too far away, it isn't. There we go, okay. So now it only attacks the opponent when we press the spacebar and when we're in range. But we wanted to actually reduce the enemy's health. So what we need to do is we need to access these variables over here so that we can reduce the health of this enemy. So what we're going to do is first we're going to make a new method. We're going to say void get hit. And what is going to happen is from a class that is outside our enemy, whenever we attack our enemy, it's going to access this method and call this method, and this method is going to reduce the health. So we're just gonna say help is equal to help minus damage, or minus a damage that the player, we need to reduce the health by the player's damage, because once we hit the enemy with the player, we need to reduce the health with the damage that the player has done. So for that, what we need is we need to pass in another parameter called player damage. Now what this means is that whenever we call this method, we need to give it this variable, and using this variable, it's going to delete some health. It's going to reduce some of the health, as you can see over here. So in practice, what we're going to do is we're going to say enemy dot get hit, and we're gonna give it a damage. So you get hit by this much damage. But to do that, we actually need we need to actually access this enemy script, because now we're in our player, and our player does not have access to our enemy script. We only have access to the transform. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna go back to our player, and since we have our opponent over here, what we can do is we can say opponent.getComponent, and we're gonna get the enemy component of the enemy. So essentially, we're grabbing the object and grabbing the enemy component over here, as you can see, opponent.getComponent. That rhymed. No, and then what we're gonna do is we're gonna press dot, and we're gonna press get hit. But as you see, it actually does not find the method get_hit. And the reason is because this thing over here is not public. So if I try and say enemy.getHit, and I pass it our damage that you're gonna do, and go back, it's gonna give an error saying that enemy.getHit is inaccessible due to protection level, which means that because by default C# makes everything private, and if it is private, other classes cannot access this method, and hence we need to make it public, which means that other classes can actually access these methods. So now when we try it and we say .getHit, you can see that the method shows up, and we can say damage, and the error goes away. And if you press play and we get closer and press spacebar, you'll see that our enemy's health actually reduced by 30 when I press spacebar, and it goes to negative, and so on. But if you realize, if you're too far away, for example, now it won't actually affect it, but the range is actually too big, so even if I'm quite far away, it reduces it. So I think I did not change the range. It's still 10, so I'll just make it 3, sorry. By the way, if you change attributes while in the play mode, it won't save your attributes. So now if I'm far away, if I go far away, you'll notice that the enemy does not lose health, but as they get closer, it loses health. And it is very, so if you want to implement an archer or a mage, the only thing you need to do is change the range, and you're suddenly an archer or a mage, or like not a melee but further a further range attacker, so to say. So now that we've got this done, we're gonna add multiple enemies now. So we're just gonna click on this enemy and just copy and paste, and we're gonna have multiple. We're just gonna scatter them around a little bit. Oops. Okay, and now we're gonna play. Now the problem we're gonna have is that when we go to our player, we're gonna realize that we only have reference to one of the enemy. So if you press spacebar, now you're gonna realize that oops, 1 second. Okay, it's that one. So if you go to this enemy over here and press spacebar, you're gonna realize that the health is gonna reduce for this enemy, but there is no actual way of selecting other enemies and reducing their health. As you can see, when I'm near this enemy, it actually does not reduce any health. So we need some way of selecting our enemy, and the way we're gonna select our enemy is by hovering our mouse over an enemy. So to do this functionality, we're going to use the mouse hover functionality provided by Unity. So the way to detect which enemy we're hovering on, so basically as we're in the game, we can hover our mouse on one of these enemies, and the program needs to detect by itself that which enemy we are hovering on. So what we can do is we can go to our enemy script, and we can say void on mouse over. And what happens is, whenever we hover our mouse on any of these enemies, the code inside this methods execute automatically, and this is something that Unity provides. So this method is specific to the Unity's API. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go inside this method and just do a debug.log select me, and we're just going to give its name. So we're going to say GameObject.name. So it's accessing its own game object, and we're printing out the game object's name. And we're just going to change the name of these enemies. So we're just going to click on this enemy, and we're going to call this enemy 1. We're going to call this enemy 2. In actuality, it doesn't really matter. The names of these enemies don't matter, but just to show you, just to make a better understanding, I'm going to change their names and hover over them. And as you can see, it says select me enemy 1. It's going to collapse. And then here it says select me enemy 2 and select me enemy 3. So now that we know which enemy we're hovering over, we have almost solved our problem. The only thing we need to do is we need to change our transform of our player opponent. So there are multiple ways to do this. One very simple way is to add public, go back to your player script and add public static transform opponent. Now static is a word which implies that this variable is same across all instances of this player object. Now that sounds very complicated, and it is supposed to, but don't worry. For now, what this means is that what you can do is you can say player dot opponent is equal to transform. Now let me explain you what this is doing. So once we have made this static, what we can do is we can access this variable from any other class without accessing this script. Because, for example, when we were accessing this public void get hit method, we needed an instance. We needed to access this script over here. As you can see, we got the enemy script over here. But when we are using static variables, we really do not need to access the script. We can directly say player.opponent is equal to the transform. So we're saying the player's.opponent is equal to this transform. So make the player's opponent me. That is what this line is saying. But now you might say, well, why don't we make this static and this static and just simply not do this and make it more complicated. I could just say enemy.getHit and make all of these static, and I could just make this static. But you cannot really do that, and I'll explain you why. I'll just change this to normal, because what static means is that if I make this variable static, what it means that if I change this health variable in one of the, wait, let me bring that to static, sorry. If I change the health of this enemy, and since the definition of static is same, it means that if I change the health of this enemy, the health of these two enemies will be the same. We will change accordingly, so the health of all of the enemies is going to be same everywhere. So if I change the health of this enemy, it's going to change the health of this enemy and this enemy. But we are only going to have one instance of player, so we can make this static, since we're not going to have multiple players. And that is basically the definition of static. And now what we're going to do is, if we play the program, and if we select our player, and if we hover over this enemy, and press spacebar, you'll realize that, oh, we need to remove the static. Whoops. And all of our enemies' health is 0. That's not good. So if we go to our enemy and press spacebar, you'll see that our enemy 2 health is reducing. And it's reduced to 10. And if I click it one more time, it reduces to -20. And if I hover over, oh, sorry, one second. If I hover over our first enemy and I press spacebar, you'll realize that our enemy's 2 health is not reducing, because our opponent is enemy 1 and we're out of range from enemy 1. But if we go closer and we press spacebar, now you'll see that our enemy 1's health is reducing. And if you go to enemy 3, and I'm gonna click enemy 3 now, you'll notice that in our inspector, our enemy 3 health is reducing. And this is how you select enemies. But we still have one more problem. If we do not hover on our enemies at all and press spacebar, you're gonna notice that we have a Nullpointerexception. And that's because when we don't hover on our enemy, our opponent over here is null, which means that it's nothing. And that is a problem because we're over here in this line, we're trying to get a position of opponent which is essentially nothing, and that does not make any sense. So what we need to do is we need to check if opponent is not equal to null. And we're gonna add and sign. So what this means is it's checking if our opponent is not equal to null. So it means that our opponent is something, we have opponent, and the and sign is a condition, which means that if this and this is true, only then we can execute this statement. So that is an and operator, which means that both conditions must be true in order to execute this statement. There is another operator which is and, or, which means that if this or this is true, so only one of them has to be true in order to execute this statement. We're going to get back to and we're going to play again. And this time, once we press spacebar, it actually does not have any errors, because if you're checking beforehand if it is not null, and when it is null, it automatically escapes from this if statement and does not check for this. That will be the end of this tutorial, and in the next tutorial we're going to cover on how to get the enemy engaged with us. So we're going to let the enemy attack us and add a little bit of AI to the enemy. We haven't added any graphics yet, but don't worry about that. We will soon go to the Unity Asset Store and download some graphics for free and add them to the game to make it beautiful. So just hold on to that. We just need to learn a little bit of the basics before we can get more complicated with the graphics. So if you have liked the video, please subscribe, like, and comment on the video, and just let me know if any improvements I can make. And if you think that any of your friends could benefit from these tutorials, please share. It helps everybody. It helps me and your friends. And thank you very much, and I hope you have a great day.